morning, and welcome to the Red Couch Sessions on Mom Psych, your alternative to Pop Psych. Today, we're privileged to have with us Dr. Ruth Nemzoff, whom I've interviewed before on Mom Psych, and you'll find 2 interviews with her if you go to the website at www.mompsych.com. So join me in welcoming Dr. Nemzoff.
Hi.
How are you doing? And thank you for being with us.
Great to be here.
Excellent. Now, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, I started out as a teacher, and then I became a runner of programs for persons with disabilities. And we started all sorts of programs, mostly vocational, work programs. And from there, I ran for the legislature, and I served 3 terms in the New Hampshire legislature. I was Deputy Commissioner of Health and Welfare. And then I worked as a fundraiser, and for about 15 years I was a professor, and then I've been writing books ever since.
And where were you a professor?
I was a professor at Bentley University, and I'm now a scholar at Brandeis University.
Brandeis, okay. And your first book was called
Don't Bite Your Tongue, How to Foster Rewarding Relationships with Your Adult Children.
And I read that back before my now adult child was even entering adulthood, and I found that the things you wrote in that book helped me tremendously.
I'm so glad. That's great. I do hear that a lot, and it just warms the cockles of my heart.
So what moved you, and tell me about the titles, first of all, because you have Don't Bite Your Tongue and you have Don't Roll Your Eyes.
Well, the first one, I have to be honest, my publisher chose. Palgrave Macmillan was my publisher, and my editor chose the title. And I think we wanted to go against the conventional wisdom, which, you hear people, everyone comes up to you when your child is marrying and says, let me give you some advice. Don't say a word. Don't say anything to your children. Keep your mouth shut. And I think that's terrible advice. That's not the way you build relationships. You build relationships by sharing, by caring, by thinking about what you say, definitely, but not by keeping your mouth shut. Silence is not golden.
Exactly.
Because what happens is the child fantasizes what you're thinking, or with adult children, they know you so well, they assume you're saying something, and it may not be what you're saying.
Because you've got a history with your child, and as your child grows, they're not necessarily cluing into the fact that you see them as an older person. To them, you still see them the way you did when they were young.
Well, maybe you do and maybe you don't, but you don't know how something's being interpreted, and unless you have a dialogue about it, you can't correct misinterpretations.
So what is the biggest mistake that you see parents making as their children grow?
Oh my goodness. We as parents make so many mistakes. But on the other hand, the big picture we often do quite right. And that's what I think is important. Focusing on what we do right. Particularly in a society that does a lot of mother blaming, that does a lot of parent blaming. Latest words for parent blaming is a snowplow parent or a hovering helicopter parent. And the truth is, we are just trying to do the best we can. And there's a continuum between being too involved and not involved enough. And you do your best guess. And of course we'll make some mistakes. I always say that Babe Ruth or Pappy, you know who Pappy is. He's a big Pappy is he was Boston's great slugger.
Oh, okay.
And he only had a 600 batting average. That's not so terrific, right? And yet for parents, we expect them to have 100% batting average. And that is not possible. So parents will make mistakes. We need to forgive ourselves for our mistakes. But we also have to do the best we can.
And Don't Roll Your Eyes. What was that name about? It's making in-laws into family.
Yes. Well, it was about keeping with the same theme, because my first book, Don't Bite Your Tongue, had been such a huge success. The publisher wanted to go on the same theme. So I put out a call to all my colleagues and my family, and my son came up with that idea of Don't Roll Your Eyes, and we felt it captured the way families can discount each other. And I don't want people to discount each other. So sometimes you'll hear people say, "Oh, that family, they like rock music," or "that family, they're highbrow, they like symphony."
Yeah.
And assuming you have nothing in common just because of some trivial matter or a more substantial matter, but yet there are still many commonalities. So that's why I picked that title.
And these are sometimes the things that separate in-laws are sometimes cultural, right?
Right, exactly. So sometimes the book is about not just the two generations, the older generation and the younger generation. It's also about all the siblings, because they too become part of a greater family, and also the two sets of in-laws. Because in some families, in some cultures, the two in-laws are expected to be family, and that means they're expected to attend every wedding and celebration and birthday party. And in other cases, it's like, I'll see you 20 years from now when the kids get married, when the grandkids get married.
And that could get huge, because let's say you have 6 kids and they all marry, and
Yes.
you end up with the in-laws from both.
Many
From all of
different
this.
families. And how do you make that enriching rather than a burden? And how do you deal with everybody's different expectations? And then, of course, I also write about the what I would call it in-loves, those people who are together but not sanctioned by church or state, and often come every year to your holiday meal, and you're not quite sure, are they related, are they not, what's their role in my family.
So what's the rule of thumb that you give people to say, here's how you navigate all those difficulties, like difficulties in culture and habits? And
Well, I think the first thing is trying to be curious about why people are the way they are, as opposed to being judgmental. So sort of leaving the judgments at the door. So people have reasons for the way they are. Find out about them. Be curious. Different culture, different religion. Find out about it. Ask questions.
And don't be so quick to think that, well, the way I do it is the right way, so that means every other way is the wrong.
Exactly. That's a huge one. And then focusing on the positive. We are all tragically humanly flawed.
Right.
And focus on what somebody has to offer. And it's interesting, sometimes people have really interesting things to offer that are very different. For example, maybe they know how to knit and you don't. Or they may be interested in sports and you're not. But in America, one of the things that greases the wheels of business is sports. So you can learn about that. So I think it's that curiosity, that willingness to learn, and realizing that we all make mistakes.
And this is the same, let's go back to your first book, which was
Don't Bite Your Tongue.
There are some of the same principles at work in both of.
Absolutely. So with parents and adult children, the first thing is to really look and know yourself. Because if we don't know ourselves, we really can't accept other people. Because if we think we are perfect, we don't know ourselves. Because nobody is perfect.
Right.
So really, facing yourself, knowing who you are, helps you accept other people for their differences and for the way they are. And then the other thing is accepting reality, not fantasy. So in the case of your adult children, you may think you wanted, a great sports athlete and a super intellect and a beautiful model, and they turn out to be terrific kids, and they may be, if you're lucky, one of those, maybe none of those, but they're still fine human beings, hopefully. But you need to deal with who they are, not who you fantasize they would be. So I always say that, before the baby's born, well, certainly in the old days, you had both a boy and a girl, and then the moment the baby's born, you just have one. And there's sort of a loss there, because whatever you have isn't both.
Right.
Occasionally.
You have to start from the
usually
beginning, accepting that things are not going to go exactly the way you planned.
Exactly. So that's true in both cases. And I guess the third thing is to really embrace it all as an adventure and enjoy things as they come along.
So with your adult children in
Yes.
particular, I think, isn't there a phase where as they're just gaining a little more independence, where we sometimes are reluctant to let go?
Well, I think from the very beginning it's true.
Yeah.
So when we first have that little toddler, you know, and I'm looking at your couch because my youngest granddaughter is almost at the point where she's going to take the step. And I'm right there, you know, because I'm not quite ready to trust that she can do it. But, you know, once I can see she toddles along the couch, I'll be okay. And I will allow her to do it without getting up like that and lurching forward. And then gradually I'm going to let her walk all the way around the room. And as I get confidence, I will allow her to walk further. So there's that back and forth of teaching skills, allowing the child to practice, and letting them go. That goes on for years. And in fact, it goes on for quite a long time. So as the children enter the teenage years, they will be asking us to do more independent things. And we want to make sure we have given them the skills to have that independence. Example, of course, when you teach the child to drive, you don't just hand them the keys and say go off. In fact, the state requires them to have quite a bit of knowledge and experience. And that's the same with many of the skills. So you want to help your child, for example, to use public transportation if you're in a city. Mm-hmm. So as they're young, teaching them how you get the money on the swipe card, how you pay the fare, how you get off the bus, what you note for landmarks. And life goes on teaching in many, many different realms because you do want to give your children those skills. Example, they're having trouble with a teacher in school. You may begin by saying, honey, I want you to go to the teacher and ask if you can have some help. Or talk with the teacher. Or maybe the first time you go together, but the second time you help them go. So you help them develop those interpersonal skills. You help them by telling them to go to the grocery store and maybe as they get older saying, will you go pick out these 5 things? So you teach them these skills and then gradually you let them go shopping for you.
Yeah. You're gradually pulling away the scaffolding bit by bit where they can support themselves until they're able to support themselves entirely.
Right, exactly. So I would almost say you're building the scaffolding by
Right.
giving them these different skills.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the first time they do anything, it's, you know, they're sleeping over a friend's house.
It's always difficult for us, you know, that
Right.
first time they're
Right.
away for overnight.
Right.
And I was talking to somebody the other day who was telling me his daughter had just gone to her first camp for the weekend. And it was more difficult for he and his wife than it was for the child.
Absolutely, absolutely. But, you know, we do devote a lot to our children. And so we have to forgive ourselves if we do have anxiety about these things. But I want to talk a little bit, you mentioned it before, you know, it's very easy to say that we have to be forgiving. It's very easy to say that we have to, you know, be friends with other people and be curious. But sometimes it takes what I call self-talk.
Mm.
You have to, you know, our instinct might be to dislike somebody. But if they're going to be our relative, and remember with in-laws, we normally don't choose them. It's someone else who chooses them in our country. Here in America or in Canada,
Right.
in the Western world. So we're having to interact with people we may or may not be natural friends. And so sometimes it takes a little self-talk to say, okay, I'm going to focus on the positive, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be our natural inclination, but we can learn. And that's sort of based on cognitive behavioral therapy, talking to ourselves about what we can do. You know, another technique that's very good is asking a friend to observe us and help us.
Interesting.
A really
That could
good
be
friend.
scary.
Yes. Well, let's take the example of our adult children. Let's say we're going to visit our adult children. and we visit them, and we think we have been so helpful with all our wonderful hints. But the next time your kids visit, maybe your kids were upset that you didn't give a helpful hint, that you were a nuisance, a pain. So you might have a really good friend you trust. It might be your spouse, it might not be. You might say, why don't you come visit too? And at the end of the visit, I'd like you to tell me all the things I said that were helpful and all the things that sounded like a criticism. So I'm going to give you an example. I just actually was in a story slam, and I told this story about a mother whose daughter was coming home, first time after being married. And the daughter calls and says, Mom, I'm calling, and the mother says, oh, I'm so excited you're coming home, first time as a married woman. And she says, well, I'm just calling to remind you that my husband's a vegetarian. Remind me? How could I forget? Remember the wedding? You were so beautiful. And the food was good, even though it was vegetarian. So the mother thinks she's giving a compliment, and the daughter hears it as a dig.
Even though it was, right.
And they're both right.
Yes.
And that is so true about so much of communication, that both people are right. It's different perspectives. So right and wrong don't enter here. It's perspective.
Right. And so if somebody has a perspective that you're criticizing, maybe there's still something you need to tweak, even if you didn't intend it to come across as a criticism, right?
Right, exactly. And remember, every statement has a history in it, with a child and a parent.
Because you may have used certain terms while the child was growing up. They're also used to seeing you as the person who's always correcting them.
Right.
And it may take them a while, even though we may have been, we think, very good about pulling back. It may also take them a while to see us as having pulled back.
Exactly. So it's interactive. We're both, and we're both changing and growing, and I think that's what makes it hard. And of course, the other thing is you come home and initially you love to be embraced again. Mommy's taking care of me. That's wonderful, but that's good for a few minutes. And then you want to become an adult again. And one of the problems when a whole family cohort gets together is maybe the siblings interact the way they did that was comfortable in the old days, but they've all moved on. And they may, at different rates, want to move back into adult mode from child mode.
Interesting.
So everyone is on a different time schedule.
So if you have that brother that you meet up with when you're both in your 40s and he's still wanting to throw spiders on you, you may want to have a talk with him and say,
I don't like spiders
I've moved on now.
It might be fun at first because it's a memory of kind of the old times, the way you used to torture each other. But but it lasts for about a nanosecond.
Exactly.
And then it's no longer funny.
Right.
Yes.
So what do you think your next topic for your next don't is going to be?
Oh, I think I'm trying blogging now.
Oh, that.
I do quite a bit. I blog on Huffington Post and on. I've done some for Cognoscenti. I've done some for all different sites. I do blog posts, and I am starting to tweet. So I like to learn about the world, about the new technologies, and I find the best way is to do them. And you know what? I make a lot of mistakes, and it's so much like parenting.
And that's interesting too, because I think for grandparents, it can be very helpful to learn these new technologies because it gives you a connection sometimes to your grandchildren.
Absolutely. And also to your children, because when the children, the adult children, are in the childbearing and rearing years, they are so busy. Yeah. And you really have to connect with them where they are. And that may be on Twitter, it may be on Facebook, it may be occasionally on the phone. But they are very busy, and we do have to recognize that we really have quite an impossible job here. As my daughter says, the only problem is there are only 24 hours in a day.
Yes.
That's really the crux of it.
Let me just start by saying I do know some people who have told me, I will never get into the computer. You will never see me on Twitter. You will never see me on Facebook.
Right.
Would you encourage people to, if that's where their grandchildren are, if that's where they're...
Well, what I'd say is, I think it's important to keep growing and learning. Mm-hmm. We all do it in different ways. I am a natural technophobe, and so I have to sort of talk to the computer every time I go to learn something new and tell it not to attack me, or really tell myself that the computer is not going to attack me and I can learn this. So it's hard. What I would encourage is for people to find as many ways to communicate with each other as possible. One of the things that's helped me, and this is a hint I could pass on to others, a friend who was also a writer said to me that she used to hate technology, and then she decided that it's her Sudoku or bridge or mind game to keep her mind flexible.
Okay.
Because they say if you keep your mind active, you're less likely to get memory loss and Alzheimer's and so forth. I don't know if it's true, but I do know that once I reframed it, that I was actually helping myself. I find it kind of fun. So that has been helpful for me. And other people have other ways of finding
and
helpful
I'm sure
things.
other people will find that helpful too, because that is the secret to good relationships in every area, is to reframe your thinking instead of look at the positive side of it, as you've been saying.
Right, exactly. And reframing is just such an important task. So when someone, for example, doesn't invite you, instead of reframing it as calling it an insult to you, which it may or may not be, you can reframe it as, isn't it lovely that they are getting together? And a typical example is, many adults, the older generation, on the one hand loves it when their kids get together. On the other hand, why did they invite me? So again, reframing it, isn't it great that the siblings love each other rather than they excluded me, it's terrible.
Well, if they love each other, you've done something right.
Exactly. And that's the other thing, is taking that credit for what you've done right.
If you get a chance, do pick up Don't Roll Your Eyes and Don't Bite Your Tongue. And I would imagine they would probably want to discuss this book with other people too, right?
Absolutely. The way I've set them up is with questions at the end of each chapter. And those are for people to reflect themselves, or with their adult children, or with a spouse, or with a friend. Or one of the ways it's been used a lot is in groups, church groups, synagogues. Various groups use it as a way to connect people. Because as you look and reflect on these questions, you get different perspectives. Just as you do when you discuss a movie with someone else, or a football game, or any activity that you do together. And we get new perspectives, and we see there are different ways of thinking about things. And my idea is to begin the conversation, and then this book is meant to continue the conversation.
Excellent. Well, it's definitely a worthwhile venture, I think. So thank you very much
My
for
pleasure.
being with us. And I'm sure we will talk to you again.
Great.